We're here today to talk about the word initial. This is an English 3 word from week 4 of quarter 4, and the word initial means the first or at the beginning. And so I'm showing you this sentence first because I know this quarter we're not doing this, but in quarters normally when we're in class, the first thing we do is to copy the sentence at the beginning of the video. That's a good thing to do first. This is the sentence related to literature that you're going to need to copy when you're making cards. So we'll start with it. So this sentence is: the initial quatrain in a Shakespearean sonnet always introduces the main theme and main metaphor. So a quatrain is the way that this kind of poem, a traditional kind of poem called a Shakespearean sonnet, is divided. It's divided into, it has 14 lines, and you have like sections. They're not actually stanzas because there are no spaces in between, but there's sections based on the rhyme scheme. And we'll learn all about that actually in my class this year. We're learning that this week. What is the structure of a Shakespearean sonnet? So the initial quatrain is the first 4 lines. And so in those first 4 lines, Shakespeare always introduces his main theme, what his poem will be about, kind of his message, starting to introduce you to his message, and usually a metaphor. And then that metaphor gets developed and explained more and more. And then in the very end, the last 2 lines is a couplet, which is 2 rhyming lines, which kind of somehow change or reflect on the message from the beginning, and like say something about it in a different way at the end. So we'll learn more about that this week. That's the structure of that particular kind of poem called a Shakespearean sonnet. And the initial quatrain is the first 4 lines of that kind of poem. Do this. What do? They always, those 4 lines always introduce the main theme and the main metaphor. So let's talk more about initial. So initial is a word that has 3 definitions. We have 3 different parts of speech. But if we think about it, the first definition is kind of the basic one, and then the other ones come from that. So the first definition can be happening at the beginning of something, or it can be the first. So like the initial quatrain is the first quatrain at the beginning of the poem. And then the second and third definitions kind of come from that, because the second and third definitions are based on the first letters, initial letters, the first letters of somebody's name or their first and last name. And then the third definition is to use those letters to sign something. So, and in Spanish, initial is inicial. So let's look at definition 1 in more detail. So definition 1 says happening at the beginning or first. So this is, here we see a picture of some one-celled organisms in a microscope. So these things are really, really tiny. They don't actually look that big. That's blown up really much bigger in a microscope. They're tiny, tiny creatures, which are one cell. And that's what scientists believe, according to the theory of evolution, that life on Earth started with single-celled organisms, that the first life on Earth were species that were only one cell. And then slowly the cells came together and started to make bigger and bigger different forms of life. And eventually we got animals and plants. So initial is at the beginning. So the initial species, that means the first species. The first species at the beginning were unicellular. Uni means one cell. So, and those were, initial means at the beginning. Okay, so the next one is going to be definition 2 then. Definition 2 is the first letter of a person's name. And I should say, we often use it, the definition is just, for basic definition, is the first letter of a person's name. But then we often use it in plural because people have more than one name. So if we talk about someone's initials, plural, that means the first letter of their first name and their last name. Or in some cases, people even also use their middle name. So you might end up with 3 initials, or, of course it's different in Spanish with having 2 last names. That's different. In English, we traditionally only have 1 last name. So for most people, initials is going to be 2 letters in English, and that is your first letter of your first name and the first letter of your last name. So for example, William Shakespeare's initials are WS. And Then the next definition will be based on that is a verb, and it's to mark or sign something with your initials. And most of you have probably done this when you're signing a contract, like let's say a lease for an apartment or a house or some other kind of business contract. There will be at the bottom we often have to sign our whole name, but then in like the middle of the contract, to show that you understand each part and agree to it, you have to initial, which means you have to sign with your initials, with your first letter of your first name, first letter of your last name, to initial it. And as I said in Spanish, inicial, word family for initial is initially. Li is an adverb. Rachel, I'm working. I'm working. Stay there for a minute. Rachel, okay, ask Sarah, please. Sorry. Let's keep going with our video. So initially, li is can be translated as mente. So in that way. So in the first way, or like at the beginning is what it's saying, describing an action that happened at the beginning. Like initially on Earth, the life forms were one-celled. And then a synonym for initial is primary or beginning. Antonym for initial would be last or final. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. That's our video for initial.